A desert of endless sand was once a thriving green world. Beneath the dunes of the Sahara lies evidence of forgotten civilizations, and we are going to uncover 20 distinct traces they left behind. By the end of this, you will permanently change how you see this vast desert, understanding it not as a barren wasteland, but as a lost cradle of human culture. We will find the ghosts of ancient rivers, decode messages left in stone, and piece together how entire societies flourished and then vanished. What does it truly mean for a civilization to be lost to time? This transformation was not a gentle shift but a dramatic rewriting of the map. The Green Sahara, a climatic phase researchers call the African Humid Period, unfolded over thousands of years. From roughly 11,000 to 5,000 years ago, the monsoons that today barely touch the desert's edge pushed deep into its heart. What is now a sea of sand became a vast, rolling savanna, a mosaic of grasslands, woodlands, and shimmering freshwater lakes. Rivers, some rivaling the Nile in scale, carved channels through the landscape, creating arteries of life. This was the stage, a fertile and dynamic world that existed for millennia, where human societies put down roots and built their lives. To grasp the scale of this change, scientists look not to the surface but deep below it. By extracting long cylinders of sediment from ancient lake beds and analyzing the fossilized pollen trapped within, they can read the story of this lost ecosystem like a book. These records show a landscape in flux, with wet phases allowing forests to spread and dry phases causing them to retreat, all paced by the slow wobble of Earth's orbit that gradually shifted the monsoon rains northward and then south again. This foundational knowledge changes everything. It means that every stone tool, every piece of pottery, and every rock painting we find was not created in a hostile void but within a thriving, interconnected environment. These were not people merely surviving on the edge of existence. They were communities flourishing at the center of a green world. With this understanding of the stage itself, we can now begin to search for the actors, and the first clues come from the most unexpected places, hidden beneath the waves of sand. The first and most profound ghost of this lost world is not a city or a temple, but the very water that gave it life. Modern satellites, equipped with radar that can penetrate the dry surface, have mapped a startling truth beneath the Sahara's dunes. They reveal the skeletons of colossal river systems, immense channels that once carried life across the continent. One of the largest, researchers believe, was the Tamanrasset River, a watercourse that may have rivaled the Ganges or the Nile, flowing over 1,200 miles from the Atlas Mountains all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. Today, its path is a buried secret, a paleo-channel visible only from space as a subtle depression in the bedrock, a ghostly imprint pressed into the earth itself. These ancient rivers were far more than just sources of water. They were the fundamental architecture of civilization in the Green Sahara. Think of them not as simple streams, but as the continent's original highways. A community settling along one of these banks had a direct, liquid connection to distant regions. Water for crops and herds was a given, but so was the potential for movement and exchange. Canoes could carry goods, ideas, and people for hundreds of miles, linking cultures that might otherwise have remained isolated. The river gravels and fossilized fish remains found in the middle of what are now utterly dry, empty depressions tell a silent, powerful story. These weren't occasional ponds, they were thriving aquatic ecosystems supporting life and, by extension, the human communities that depended on them. To find where the people of the Green Sahara lived, you first have to find the water. These vanished rivers are the most vital clues, the veins of that lost world. By tracing their buried courses, archaeologists gain a map to the past, guiding them to the most likely places for settlements, for fishing camps, for the crossroads of ancient trade. It is a detective story written in hydrology, but a river alone does not make a home. People need tools, they create art, and they leave marks of their presence. So, if these watery highways point the way, what do we find when we finally arrive at the destinations they led to? The answer is etched in stone, waiting in the open air for thousands of years. Where the great rivers carved their paths, they often pooled into even more spectacular reservoirs of life. The second trace of the vanished green Sahara lies in the stark, geometric outlines of its ancient lakes. From the air, the desert floor reveals strange, ghostly patterns, concentric rings, and smooth, flat basins that look utterly alien in the dry expanse. These are the shorelines of Paleolakes, the colossal freshwater seas that once dominated the interior. The most staggering of them all was Lake Chad. At its peak, this inland sea was larger than the Caspian Sea is today, a body of water so vast it would have created its own weather patterns, its own microclimates along hundreds of miles of fertile coast. Its modern remnant, Lake Chad, is a mere puddle in comparison, a heartbreaking hint of its former glory. These ancient shorelines were not just scenic backdrops. They were the bustling waterfront districts of the Sahara. A high, defined ridge marking an old beach is a beacon for archaeologists. It signals a place where people would have naturally gathered. Here, on these stable banks, communities built seasonal camps and perhaps more permanent settlements. They fished from waters teeming with life, hunted the animals that came to drink, and gathered lush vegetation. The evidence is often right at your feet, in the form of shell middens, piles of discarded fish bones, and stone tools littering the ground. These are the literal leftovers of daily meals and daily work, a direct line to the mundane, precious rhythm of life 10,000 years ago. But these lake beds hold a deeper secret than just discarded tools. They are natural history books, with each layer of sediment a page in the story of the climate. Scientists can extract long cores from these basins and read them like a timeline. Within the mud, they find fossilized pollen, revealing exactly what types of plants and trees flourished nearby. They find the microscopic glass shells of diatoms, tiny water organisms that are incredibly sensitive to water chemistry and temperature. Together, this evidence paints a year-by-year portrait of the lake's health, its depth, and the surrounding ecosystem. It tells us not just that people lived here, but precisely what their world was like when they did, and how it changed around them. The final layers of fine, wind-blown dust that cap these sequences tell the quiet, inevitable end of the story. The moment the rains failed and the Great Lakes began to shrink, retreating inward until only the memory of their shores remained. As the water vanished from these lowland basins, human attention necessarily turned toward the more permanent, reliable features of the landscape, the high ground that held its own resources and its own, more enduring canvas. High in the sun-baked mountains, a silent gallery holds the memory of a world in color. The third trace of the green Sahara is etched and painted onto the very rock faces of its highlands, in places like the Tassili Niger in Algeria and the Ennedi Plateau in Chad. Here, across thousands of sheltered cliffs and cave walls, you find an open-air museum of staggering scale. The images are a direct, breathtaking contradiction to the empty desert below. They show herds of giraffes with elegant, looping necks, elephants with sweeping tusks, and crocodiles basking on riverbanks. Human figures are shown in motion, hunting with bows, dancing in lines, and engaged in what appear to be ceremonial gatherings. This is not a single snapshot, but a chronicle painted over thousands of years. The earliest layers of art, often called the Roundhead period for their distinctive human forms, show a world teeming with the wildlife of a lush savanna. The artists captured not just animals, but an entire ecosystem that sustained them. As you move through time, the story on the rock changes. The great humid era fauna begin to fade. In their place, the art becomes dominated by magnificent, carefully detailed cattle. These are the Bovidian periods, showcasing herds that are clearly domesticated, a sign of a profound shift in how people related to their environment. No longer just hunters in a land of plenty, they had become herders, managing and moving with their wealth on the hoof. The final chapters of this stone chronicle show horses pulling light chariots, figures that speak of a faster, more mobile way of life, perhaps a necessary adaptation to a landscape that was growing drier, more demanding, and more vast. This artistic legacy is far more than decoration. It is a direct line of communication from a lost mind to our own. We are seeing their priorities, their spiritual beliefs, and their daily realities through their own eyes. The shift in subject matter is a direct, undeniable record of climate change, witnessed and recorded by the people living through it. A giraffe painted on a wall is proof that a giraffe once stood there. The transition to cattle herding scenes maps a cultural revolution. These galleries are historical documents in pigment and stone, each style representing a different chapter in the long human story of the Sahara. They show us a people deeply connected to their world, artists who felt compelled to record the beauty and the bounty around them, and who continued to create even as that world transformed. But art requires a stable society to produce, and a stable society requires more than temporary camps. The move toward pastoral life hinted at in the later paintings suggests communities were putting down deeper roots, building places meant to last. This artistic expression naturally makes us wonder about the physical footprint they left behind, the places they called home. The stone itself tells the story of a busy, resourceful world. Across the now silent plains of the former savanna, the ground is often littered with a particular kind of treasure. These are not grand monuments, but the scattered, everyday tools of survival, the fourth trace of the Green Sahara's people. Archaeologists call them lithic scatters, vast carpets of stone chips, discarded cores, and broken or finished tools that mark the spots where ancient camps and workshops once stood. To an untrained eye, it might look like a random pile of rocks, but to a researcher, each piece is a data point, a frozen moment of human activity. Imagine kneeling in the dust and picking up a palm-sized hand axe, its edge still sharp after thousands of years. You are holding the very object someone used to butcher a meal, shape a wooden spear, or scrape a hide. That direct physical connection across time is the power of these silent sites. The technology preserved in these scatters is a marvel of early ingenuity. The people of the Green Sahara were master stoneworkers. They sought out the best materials like fine-grained chert, durable quartzite, and the prized glass-like obsidian that could hold the sharpest edge. Their techniques were sophisticated and purposeful. They didn't just smash rocks. They used a method called pressure flaking, applying precise, controlled force with a bone or antler tool to peel off long, thin flakes and shape a core into a perfect spear point or a delicate scraping tool. The debris left behind is a roadmap of their process. By studying the flakes, you can almost see the artisan sitting there, turning the core in their hand, planning each strike. And the finished tools themselves are specialized. Different shapes were designed for different tasks. A heavy, blunt scraper was for preparing animal hides. A delicate, pointed beron was for engraving bone or wood. A leaf-shaped point, carefully notched, was meant to be hafted onto a spear for hunting. This specialization tells us these were not just people reacting to their environment. They were actively engineering their way through it, creating a toolkit for a specific way of life. By mapping the distribution of these tools and the unique stones they were made from, researchers can trace invisible lines across the ancient landscape. Finding tools made from obsidian, a volcanic glass that only occurs in a few specific mountain ranges, hundreds of miles from their source, is clear evidence of trade or long-distance seasonal movement. The changing styles of tools over time, from the tanged spear points of the early Assyrian culture to the finely polished axes of later Neolithic groups, chart a course of technological evolution. Each scatter is more than a campsite, it's a node in a network. It shows where people stopped, what they were doing, and sometimes where they were going. These patterns reveal migration routes that followed the shrinking rivers and lakes, and social connections that stretched across the green expanse. The story written in stone is one of adaptation, communication, and profound skill. But a scattering of tools, however sophisticated, speaks of a mobile, perhaps temporary existence. It hints at a life following herds and water sources. The true test of a civilization, however, often lies in what it builds to last, in the structures it leaves behind when it chooses to stay. The scattered tools of a mobile life give way to something far more permanent and profound. In the heart of what was once a green basin, people stopped moving long enough to move mountains of stone. The fifth trace of the Green Sahara's lost civilizations is found in its megalithic monuments and stone circles. At places like Nabta Playa in Egypt, the arrangement of massive slabs tells a story not of survival, but of sophisticated thought. Here, over 7,000 years ago, a community built what researchers believe is one of the world's oldest known astronomical observatories. They carefully placed large stones to form a calendar circle, aligning specific megaliths with the rising sun of the summer solstice. This was not random. In a world governed by the coming and going of the rains, predicting the seasons was a matter of life and death. By marking the solstice, these early herders could anticipate the vital monsoon, organizing their pastoral calendar, knowing when to move their cattle to new grazing lands or when to gather for communal ceremonies. This simple stone circle represents a monumental leap in human understanding, a conscious effort to read the sky and harmonize their society with the cosmos. Further west, across the Mesak Plateau in Libya, the landscape is dotted with thousands of burial cairns and tumuli, stone mounds that mark the final resting places of individuals. The sheer effort involved speaks volumes. Transporting and stacking these stones required coordinated labor, a sign of social organization where people came together for a shared purpose beyond daily needs. The presence of these monuments suggests a society with recognized leaders, perhaps elders or spiritual guides, who could direct such communal projects. Within some of these tombs, archaeologists have found something deeply revealing. Alongside human remains, they have discovered the carefully placed bones of cattle. This practice of cattle burials points to a spiritual bond that went far beyond economics. These animals were not just a source of milk or meat, they were central to cultural identity and likely seen as sacred companions in life and in whatever lay beyond. The monuments themselves, whether aligned with the stars or built as memorials, are hallmarks of a civilization moving past simple subsistence. They show us a people thinking about time, about ceremony, about their place in the universe, and honoring their connection to the animals that sustain them. This organized thought, this ability to plan for seasons and generations, naturally extended to the most fundamental challenge of all, securing their food in a landscape that was already beginning to change. The air of the Green Sahara was thick with more than just moisture. It was filled with a living, breathing landscape we can no longer see. To reconstruct that lost world in stunning detail, scientists turn to evidence almost too small to comprehend. The sixth trace of these lost civilizations is not found in grand monuments, but in the microscopic fossilized pollen and preserved plant remains sealed within the mud of ancient lakebeds. These tiny, nearly indestructible grains are time capsules, each one a botanical fingerprint of a specific plant. When specialists, known as palynologists, extract long sediment cores and analyze these grains under a microscope, they are reading a direct environmental history. They find abundant evidence of grasses that formed vast savannas, of acacia trees that provided shade and forage, and of sedges that grew along water margins. This pollen rain paints a precise picture of a landscape that could support massive herds of animals and, by extension, the human communities that depended on them. The real power of this record, however, lies in its change over time. As you move up through the layers of mud corresponding to later and later periods, the pollen story shifts dramatically. The diverse, water-loving grasses and trees begin to fade. Their place is taken by a rising count of pollen from arid-adapted plants, like hardy shrubs and sparse desert grasses. This is the silent, botanical testimony of the drying, a direct environmental transcript of the green Sahara turning to brown. But the story of plants is not just about the wild landscape, it is also about human ingenuity. In rare, perfectly dry shelters and caves, archaeologists have made astonishing finds that go beyond pollen. They have discovered actual, desiccated seeds and grains, preserved for millennia in the arid air. They have found fragments of woven baskets and simple pottery. These are not casual finds. They represent a fundamental shift in the relationship between people and their environment. The presence of stored grain suggests early experiments with cultivation, a move beyond simple foraging toward managing and protecting food sources. A woven basket is a technology of planning. It implies the intention to collect and hold a surplus for later use. This is a crucial glimpse into the economy of these societies. They were not merely passive inhabitants of a lush world. They were active participants beginning to manipulate it, to select useful plants, and to develop strategies for security. The botanical record, therefore, gives us two vital layers of understanding. First, it provides the undeniable backdrop, the very stage setting of the savanna that made everything else possible. And second, it reveals the first tentative steps these communities took to assert control over their food supply. A necessary innovation as the generous environment around them began to withdraw its bounty. This intricate relationship with the plant world was only one half of the survival equation, for the green Sahara was a world defined just as powerfully by its magnificent roaming herds. The trash heaps of a vanished world hold the bones of its lost inhabitants. The seventh trace of the green Sahara is found in the ancient middens, the refuse piles of settlements where generations discarded the remnants of their meals. To sift through these layers of bone and shell is to open a direct menu to the past, and the offerings are astonishing. Archaeologists carefully excavating these sites pull from the dust the massive skulls of hippopotamus, the curved horns of water buffalo, and the delicate skeletons of numerous antelope species, animals that today cannot survive anywhere near this landscape. Alongside them are the vertebrae and scales of large fish, proof of thriving freshwater ecosystems. Each bone is a data point, a silent witness to a rich hunting and fishing economy that flourished along the lakeshores and rivers. The story deepens when you examine these bones under magnification. Many bear the fine, deliberate cut marks of stone tools, a record of ancient butchery. The patterns of these marks reveal sophisticated processing techniques, showing how communities efficiently stripped meat, broke bones for marrow, and prepared hides, maximizing the use of every animal. This faunal archive, however, is not static. As you move upward through the layers of a midden corresponding to later centuries, a profound shift occurs. The bones of wild hippo and buffalo become less common. In their place, you find an increasing abundance of bones from domesticated cattle. This is the physical evidence of a societal pivot, a critical transition from a life based primarily on hunting the wild bounty of the savanna to one centered on herding and managing livestock. This move toward pastoralism was likely a brilliant adaptation to a changing climate, as the reliable wild game grew scarcer and the open grasslands remained perfect for grazing herds. The bones themselves can tell an even more detailed story through a scientific technique called isotopic analysis. The elements locked within an animal's bone carry a chemical signature of the water and plants it consumed during its life. By studying the isotopes in a cattle bone from an ancient camp, researchers can determine if that animal grazed locally year-round or undertook long seasonal migrations to follow the rains. This can reveal, in turn, whether a human site was occupied permanently or only during certain wet or dry seasons. These humble middens, therefore, are far more than ancient garbage dumps. They are a dynamic record of survival, innovation, and a deepening partnership between humans and animals. They show a society intelligently shifting its relationship with the natural world, from taking what it offered to carefully steering a part of it. This growing bond of dependence and management leads us to the next logical question. If they were herding cattle across this green expanse, what paths did they follow, and what markers did they leave along the way to guide their journeys? The bond between human and animal was becoming something more profound than hunter and prey. Across the green Sahara, a revolutionary partnership was being forged, one that would reshape cultures and define survival for generations. The eighth trace of these lost civilizations lies in the undeniable evidence of early cattle domestication. This was not just a change in diet, it was a fundamental reimagining of society itself. The most direct testimony comes from the rock art galleries themselves. The later paintings from the Bovidian periods are meticulous portraits of pastoral life. They show figures gently guiding herds, not hunting them. The cattle are often depicted with distinctive, lyre-shaped horns and spotted hides, details so precise that some researchers believe they represent specific prized breeds. This art is a celebration, a cultural declaration that these animals were now central to identity. The physical proof is just as compelling. At sites like Fuda in Libya, archaeologists have unearthed cattle bones that tell a silent but definitive story. When compared to their wild ancestors, the aurochs, these bones show clear morphological changes, signs of what scientists call the domestication syndrome. They are smaller, a result of controlled breeding. The leg bones show less robust muscle attachments, indicating the animals were no longer constantly fleeing predators but living under human protection. This shift required a staggering amount of knowledge and coordination. Managing large herds meant understanding complex grazing patterns across vast distances, knowing where seasonal water sources would emerge, and developing social rules to govern ownership and movement. It fostered a nomadic or semi-nomadic lifestyle, a rhythm of life tuned to the needs of the herd rather than a fixed plot of land. This way of life would become the heartbeat of Saharan cultures for thousands of years. The value of cattle transcended the purely practical. Their prominence in ritual burials where they were interred alongside individuals speaks to a deep spiritual connection. They were not merely livestock, they were wealth on the hoof, a symbol of status, and possibly a divine link to the forces of life and fertility. This move toward pastoralism was a masterstroke of adaptation. As the green savanna began to contract and the Great Lakes shrank, the wide open grasslands that remained were perfectly suited to grazing. A herd could move to find water and fresh pasture in a way a settled farming village could not. It was a mobile, resilient strategy for a landscape in flux. This brilliant innovation in managing life, however, demanded parallel innovations in managing the very materials of existence, leading to another leap forward that would leave its own durable mark on the archaeological record. The heavy, rhythmic sound of grinding was the sound of a new kind of security. Across the camps of the Green Sahara, a new class of tool began to appear, one not designed for hunting or butchering but for transforming. The ninth trace of these lost civilizations is found in the simple, profound weight of grinding stones, mortars, and pestles. These are not the portable, flake tools of a mobile hunter, but heavy, stationary objects, often carved from large slabs of granite or sandstone, meant to be used in one place and left there. Their very presence signals a shift in priorities. You do not carry a 50-pound grinding slab with you on a long seasonal migration. These tools belong to a community that is spending more time in a single location, investing its labor in processing a new kind of resource, wild grains. The savannas of the humid Sahara were rich with the ancestors of plants like millet and sorghum, grasses that produced edible seeds. Gathering these tiny grains was one thing, but to make them a staple food required technology. The grinders provided that, by crushing the hard seeds between stone surfaces, people could release the nutritious flour inside, creating a paste or porridge that could feed many. This was a dietary revolution, a move toward a more predictable, storable food source that supplemented the meat from herds and hunts. The evidence locked in these stones is remarkably detailed. Modern scientists use microscopic residue analysis, studying the tiny particles of plant starch and silica that became embedded in the stone's pores thousands of years ago. This forensic botany can identify the exact species of grain that was processed, offering a direct menu from the past. Furthermore, the specific wear patterns on a grinding slab, the smooth, polished hollow created by endless circular motion, tells its own story of sustained use, of a daily chore that became central to life. This move toward processing grains is a whisper of something even more significant, the very first experiments with cultivation. It represents a deep, observational knowledge of the plant life cycle. To rely on these seeds, you must know where they grow when they ripen, and perhaps you begin to protect those patches of land, to clear away competing plants, to accidentally or intentionally scatter seeds near your camp. It is the fragile, foundational step toward agriculture. This technological trace marks a society beginning to anchor itself, to invest labor not just in the immediate capture of food, but in its delayed production and storage. A community with a store of grain has a buffer against a bad season, a resource that can be traded, and a reason to defend a particular place. It is a key step toward the kind of social complexity that allows for specialization. With a more stable food base freeing up time and creative energy, these communities could turn their attention beyond mere survival to crafting objects of beauty, identity, and personal expression. A delicate bead no larger than a grain of rice can hold the map of a continent. Within the cool shade of rock shelters like Takakori in Libya, the 10th trace of the green Sahara emerges not from tools or bones, but from beauty itself. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient workshops, their floors still littered with the raw materials of personal adornment. Here, they find thousands of tiny, meticulously shaped beads crafted from ostrich eggshell, smooth stone pendants polished to a shine, and even seashells, their origins traced to the distant Mediterranean and Red Sea coasts hundreds of kilometers away. Many of these shells and stones bear a single, precise hole, drilled for stringing onto a necklace or a bracelet. This is far more than ancient vanity. Each bead is a node in a vast, invisible network. To possess a seashell in the deep Sahara meant someone, or more likely a chain of someone's, carried that object across staggering distances, passing it from hand to hand through trade, gift-giving, or alliance. These were the social media of their time, silent carriers of information about connections, status, and identity. The craftsmanship itself is a marvel of patience and skill. Creating a uniform, disc-shaped bead from fragile ostrich eggshell requires a steady hand and a sophisticated process. The shell was first broken into small, manageable pieces, then ground into a rough shape against a stone, and finally, the central hole was drilled, likely with a fine, bow-driven stone or bone point. This was not a hurried task. It was dedicated, artistic labor, suggesting that some individuals may have begun to specialize in this craft, their skill valued by the community. What do these personal treasures tell us? They speak of a society with the security and stability to invest time in non-essential beauty. They indicate social hierarchy, where certain ornaments might denote leadership, elder status, or ritual knowledge. A necklace of rare, imported shells would have been a powerful statement of one's place in a wide world. Most profoundly, they shatter the illusion of isolation. The people of the Green Sahara were not living in a secluded paradise. They were actively connected through these long chains of exchange to other cultures, other ideas, and other shores. These tiny artifacts are proof that even in a vast green world, human curiosity and social ambition built bridges across the landscape, but trade requires routes and goods do not move themselves. If beads and shells were traveling such immense distances, what pathways did they follow, and what powered the movement of people and ideas across this thriving, interconnected savanna? A single bead of Amazonite tells a story of a continent in conversation. The 11th trace of the Green Sahara is not a single object, but a pattern, a web of connections written in exotic stones and distant shells. Across the ancient camps and burial sites, archaeologists consistently find materials with a passport, items that originated hundreds, sometimes thousands, of kilometers away. There is obsidian, a volcanic glass sharper than steel, sourced from specific peaks in the Tibesti or Air Mountains. There is amazonite, a vibrant green-blue gemstone, whose only known source in all of Africa is the distant Tibesti Range. And there are those marine shells from both the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, glimmering in the deep interior. These were not washed in by ancient floods, they were carried deliberately and with purpose. By plotting the find spots of these exotic materials on a map, researchers can begin to draw lines, connecting the dots to reveal prehistoric trade routes that once crisscrossed the lush savanna. These were the information superhighways of their time. A nodule of Tibesti obsidian found at a settlement near a vanished lake means someone traversed that entire distance, or more likely, that the object passed through a chain of hands, moving from community to community in a long-distance exchange network. This trade moved far more than luxury goods. Along these same paths traveled ideas, new techniques for tool-making or pottery, stories, and even marriage partners, facilitating a flow of genes between populations. The seasonal movements of cattle herders would have naturally followed corridors of water and grazing, and these very corridors became the established routes along which goods and knowledge could reliably travel. It is a compelling thought that the foundational paths of later historical trans-Saharan trade, like those used by the Garamantes, were not pioneered in the desert, but were first worn into the earth during the green, wet millennia when travel was not a desperate struggle, but a practical journey. The discovery of central sites with dense concentrations of these non-local materials points to trading hubs, places where different routes converged and communities gathered to exchange. This evidence completely shatters the old image of isolated, inward-looking tribes. Instead, it reveals the Green Sahara as a vast, interactive sphere, a continent slowly knitting itself together through exchange. This level of economic and social interaction requires more than casual meetings at watering holes. It implies organization, mutual understanding, and a degree of social complexity that could support such sustained networks. It makes you wonder what kind of societies were capable of maintaining these continental connections, and what happened when the landscape that supported them began to fundamentally change. The web of trade hinted at by distant shells and stones would one day require an empire to manage it. As the great green savanna finally faded into memory, the people of the Sahara did not simply vanish. They adapted, and in one spectacular case, they engineered a defiance of the desert itself. The 12th trace of this legacy is found in the hydraulic empire of the Garamantes, who flourished in the Libyan Fezzan from roughly 500 years before the Common Era to around 700 years into it. While their civilization rose long after the peak of the humid period, they are a direct, brilliant inheritor of its people and their knowledge. The Garamantes faced a world we would recognize, a Sahara of relentless sun and scarce surface water. Their survival, and indeed their flourishing, was an act of profound ingenuity. They became master miners of a hidden resource, fossil water, ancient rainwater that had seeped into deep underground aquifers during the Green Sahara millennia earlier. To reach this buried treasure, they engineered a system of underground tunnels called fagaras. These were not simple wells. Teams of workers would dig a long, gently sloping tunnel back from their oasis into the distant aquifer, with vertical access shafts dug at regular intervals for construction and maintenance. Gravity did the rest, silently guiding the precious water to the surface, where it could irrigate vast date palm groves and fields of grain. This was a civilization literally built on the legacy of the ancient rains, a technological triumph that turned desert oases into green, productive islands. At the heart of this engineered landscape stood their capital, Garama. Excavations reveal a true urban center with multi-story mud-brick buildings, fortified walls, and elaborate pyramid-shaped tombs for their elites. This was no temporary camp. It was the hub of a complex, stratified society that controlled the emerging trans-Saharan trade routes, moving goods like gold, ivory, and slaves between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean coast. The Garamantes show us a direct line of cultural continuity. They were likely the descendants of the earlier pastoralists who had roamed the same region when it was green, their social structures and knowledge hardening into statecraft as the environment became more demanding. Their story is one of breathtaking resilience, a civilization that looked at the encroaching desert and chose not to flee but to dig, to build, and to thrive. Their engineering marvel stands as a powerful testament to human innovation, but it also raises a haunting question. If a society could achieve such complexity in a fully arid world, what might their ancestors have been capable of building in the lost paradise of the Green Sahara itself, when water was abundant and life was everywhere? The sands of Niger hold a story written in bones and quiet ceremony. At a place called Gobero, on the edge of a long-vanished lake, archaeologists uncovered a site of profound intimacy, a 13th trace of the Green Sahara that moves us from sweeping landscapes to individual lives. This is not just a settlement, but a carefully used cemetery, a place where two entirely different cultures chose to lay their loved ones to rest over a span of more than 5,000 years. The first were the Kiphians, tall, robust hunter-fisher-gatherers who thrived here when the lake was deep and full, around 9,000 years ago. Their burials are often simple, the individuals laid to rest with harpoons carved from bone and hooks made from shell, tools of a life intimately tied to the water. Then, after a long dry interval when the site was abandoned, a new people arrived. These were the Tenerians, a pastoral society who returned to the region around 7,000 years ago as a new, though less robust, humid phase began. Their world was different, centered on herds of cattle, and their burials reflect this. They interred their loved ones with personal adornments like beads and ivory rings, and sometimes with the remains of their animals, a clear sign of the spiritual bond between herder and herd. The preservation at Gobero is exceptional due to the dry, alkaline soil. Researchers found not just skeletons, but in some cases, the very silhouettes of the individuals, the shadows of their bodies pressed into the earth, along with delicate artifacts that would have normally decayed. This level of detail offers a startlingly personal window. Scientists can analyze the chemical isotopes in the bones to reconstruct their diets, confirming the Kiphians ate a diet rich in fish, and the Tenerians relied more on cattle and wild plants. They can study the wear on their bones to understand the physical demands of their lives. One burial in particular brings the human reality of this distant time into sharp, poignant focus. It is the resting place of a woman with two children carefully arranged beside her, their limbs gently intertwined. The position suggests a single, heartfelt act of laying them to rest together, a moment of profound loss frozen for millennia. This grave and the entire site moves us beyond theories of migration and climate adaptation. It lets us glimpse the universal experiences of care, of grief, and of the desire to honor those who have passed. Gobero acts as a unique time capsule, capturing two separate chapters of human adaptation to the same changing landscape. It shows us that the story of the Green Sahara is not one of a single, unchanging people, but of successive waves of humanity, each learning to live in their version of this world, each leaving their own distinct mark upon it. Their intimate knowledge of the earth was matched only by their understanding of the sky above them, a connection written not in graves, but in the very alignment of their world. The alignment of stones to the stars reveals a mind that saw order in the universe. While Nabta Playa is the most famous example, it is not alone. Scattered across the Sahara, from the Messac Plateau to the highlands of Mauritania, researchers have documented numerous stone circles, cairns, and solitary standing megaliths whose positions seem carefully calculated. These 14th trace the practice of archaeoastronomy, suggests that for the people of the Green Sahara, the sky was not just a canopy of light, but a clock, a calendar, and a compass. A solitary menhir, a towering stone set upright, might cast a specific shadow that only touches a second stone at the exact moment of the summer solstice sunrise. A ring of smaller stones could be arranged to frame the rising point of a particularly bright star, like Sirius, whose heliacal rising just before dawn was a crucial marker of the coming rainy season across many ancient cultures. This was not casual stargazing. It was a systematic, generational project of observation. In a landscape that was, even in its green phase, a vast and relatively featureless plain, the heavens provided the only fixed reference points that never changed. The cycles of the sun, moon, and stars offered a reliable framework upon which to hang the unpredictable rhythms of weather and ecology. This knowledge was deeply practical. Knowing the solstice meant knowing when to begin moving herds to distant pastures that would soon receive rain. Predicting the equinox could coordinate large, communal gatherings for trade or ceremony, ensuring people from distant areas could converge at an agreed-upon time. It transformed survival from a game of chance into a more managed endeavor, but the implications run deeper than logistics. To build monuments aligned with celestial events is to make a profound philosophical statement. It embeds cosmic order into the very fabric of culture, suggesting a worldview where human life was intimately connected to and mirrored by the grand cycles above. This represents a sophisticated intellectual tradition, one where shamans or early astronomers held vital societal roles as interpreters of the sky's language. The effort required to erect these stones, to test and confirm alignments over generations, speaks of a shared purpose and a desire to literally anchor their understanding of time and space into the earth itself. Their world was guided by a harmony between the soil beneath their feet and the infinite dance overhead, a connection that rooted them to their changing home. That very soil, patiently built up over millennia, holds its own silent record of how they nurtured that connection. The ground beneath the Sahara holds its deepest memories. If you could slice through a towering dune, you would find something astonishing beneath the sterile sand, a layer of rich, dark earth. This is the 15th trace of the vanished world, the fossil soils or paleosols that formed under a steady, soaking rain. They are not just dirt, they are time capsules of the ecosystem itself. Within these compacted layers, geologists find the crumbled remains of ancient roots, the delicate tunnels of long-gone insects and worms, and even the chemical signatures of decomposed leaves and grasses. This is the literal humus of life, proof that a complex, living skin once covered this land, cycling nutrients and supporting a web of organisms from the smallest microbes to the grazing herds above. By analyzing the chemistry and structure of these soils, scientists can reconstruct the past with remarkable precision. the types of clay minerals present can indicate how much rainfall the region received. The shape and depth of root casts reveal whether the landscape was dominated by shallow grasses or deeper-rooted shrubs and trees. Most importantly, these soil layers are sealed under the wind-blown sand that followed, creating a clear timestamp in the geological record. They mark the moment the rains failed, the plants died, and the desert began its advance, literally burying the green world under a blanket of dust. For an archaeologist, discovering a site preserved on one of these ancient land surfaces is a gift of unparalleled clarity. When stone tools or pottery fragments are found embedded within a paleosol, it means they are resting exactly where they were left thousands of years ago on the stable ground of that era. This context is everything. It removes the confusion of objects being scattered by later wind or water, allowing researchers to see the true layout of a campfire, a workshop, or a burial, frozen in the very moment the community lived there. This trace is the ultimate foundation, the very stage floor upon which the entire drama of the Green Sahara played out. It gives substance to the art, the tools, and the trade goods, rooting them in a tangible, fertile earth. To stand on that buried ground is to stand in the footprints of its people, connected to them not just by their artifacts, but by the shared soil they once cultivated, walked upon, and called home. This profound connection to the land inevitably leads us to a more intimate connection to the people themselves, whose physical remains carry the final, personal stories of life in this lost paradise. The bones of the past carry a chemical memory of the lives they lived. At sites like Gobero and the Takakori rock shelter, the 16th trace of the Green Sahara is written not in stone or pigment, but in the very skeletal remains of its people. This biological archive offers a startlingly intimate portrait, moving beyond what they made to understand who they were. Through careful scientific analysis, researchers can now read the stories of diet, health, and movement locked within teeth and bone. A technique called isotopic analysis acts as a kind of dietary time machine. The elements absorbed from food and water become permanently incorporated into our tissues. By measuring the ratios of specific isotopes in ancient bones, scientists can determine if an individual's diet was dominated by the meat of grazing animals, by freshwater fish from the lakes, or by wild grains and plants from the savanna. This tells us not just what was on the menu, but how a community related to its environment. A skeleton with a chemical signature rich in aquatic resources tells a story of life anchored to a lakeshore, while one showing a heavy reliance on terrestrial plants and meat might belong to a herder or hunter of the open plains. Even more remarkable, our teeth record a childhood timeline. As teeth form in our youth, they layer in isotopes from the local water and food. By sampling tiny sequential segments along a single tooth, researchers can detect if an individual moved across different geological regions during their early years. A tooth that shows a shift in its isotopic signature is a passport stamp from millennia ago, evidence of a childhood migration, perhaps following the seasonal movements of a herd or relocating with a family group to a new territory. This transforms ancient bones from static artifacts into narratives of personal journey. The story deepens further with the emerging field of ancient DNA. While Africa's heat and climate pose great challenges for preserving genetic material, successful studies are beginning to illuminate the population history of this region. Early results suggest the people of the Green Sahara were part of a complex and ancient tapestry. Their genetic legacy appears to flow into many modern populations across the Sahel, the band of semi-arid land south of the desert and beyond. This indicates that when the arid phase intensified, these communities did not simply vanish. They migrated, blending with other groups, carrying their ancestry and adaptations southward and eastward. These biological traces, the chemistry of diet, the geography in a tooth, the genes passed down complete the picture in a profoundly human way. They tell us of resilience in the face of environmental hardship, of flexible strategies for survival, and of deep, enduring connections across the continent. The physical legacy of these individuals is woven into the heritage of millions today, a living testament to their successful adaptation. And just as their biological lineage persisted, so too did the creative spirit of their world, finding new expression even as the green faded to gold. A single recurring pattern on a clay pot can be a whisper of shared identity across the millennia. The 17th trace of the green Sahara is found in the remarkable continuity of its material culture, the everyday objects that speak of tradition passed down through generations. Across the vast expanse of the former savanna, from the Nile Valley to the Atlantic coast, archaeologists uncover a story not of constant disruption, but of enduring connection. Pottery styles, tool types, and even specific artistic motifs persist for thousands of years, changing slowly, adapting to new needs, but never completely breaking from their roots. This is a powerful clue that as the climate shifted, what we often see is not the complete replacement of one people by another, but the transformation of a persistent culture, adapting its way of life while holding onto a core sense of who they were. Take, for example, the beautiful and distinctive dotted wavy line pottery of the early Saharan Neolithic. This isn't just a local style. Fragments of this same pottery, with its characteristic impressed decoration, are found scattered over an area larger than many modern nations. Such a widespread, shared aesthetic is a clear signal. It could indicate the movement of people carrying their potting traditions with them as they migrated to new pastures. Or it could point to a network of communication so strong that ideas about how to make and decorate a water jar spread faster than the people themselves, becoming a common cultural language across the green world. This continuity amidst such profound environmental turmoil is a testament to incredible resilience. It shows societies that were flexible, not fragile. When the Great Lakes shrank, they didn't abandon their identity. They modified their toolkit, perhaps shifting from heavy fishing gear to more portable herding equipment. When the rains became less reliable, they might have altered settlement patterns, but they often continued making pottery in the way their grandmothers had taught them, a tangible link to the past in an uncertain present. For an archaeologist, these threads of material culture are like finding pieces of the same fabric in different rooms of a ruined house. They allow researchers to connect sites that are hundreds of kilometers apart into a coherent narrative, to see not just isolated camps, but a cultural sphere with a shared history. This persistence of tradition, this stubborn continuity of design and technique, makes the final dispersal of these communities all the more poignant. It suggests they held on to their way of life with great tenacity, adapting until adaptation was no longer possible within their homeland. The very endurance of their culture leads us inevitably to the powerful, natural force that ultimately overwhelmed even their most resilient traditions, the force that drew the final curtain on the green world itself. The final layer of an ancient hearth tells a quiet, definitive story. At countless sites across the Sahara, the archaeological record reaches a sudden, silent horizon. Beneath it, you find the vibrant scatter of life, stone tools, pottery fragments, and the dark stain of old fires. Above it, there is only a sterile blanket of wind-blown sand. This 18th trace, the abandonment layer, marks the moment the music stopped. It is the physical evidence of a forced farewell, coinciding with the climatic tipping point around 5,000 years ago when the African humid period definitively ended. The monsoon rains, which had sustained the green world for millennia, retreated southward. The feedback loops of a drying climate took over, with less vegetation leading to more reflected sunlight and even less rain. The desert did not just advance, it reclaimed its territory with startling speed. These silent layers are the archaeology of absence. They show us the point where a once reliable lake became a playa of cracked mud, where the herds of antelope and buffalo vanished for lack of forage, and where the deep wells and seasonal pools dried up for the last time. For the societies built upon this green foundation, the choice was stark and universal: adapt, move, or face an impossible struggle. This was not a single, coordinated exodus, but a prolonged generational dispersal, a slow unraveling of a way of life as each community reached its own breaking point. Studying the sand that seals these sites is like reading the last page of a chapter. By analyzing the depth and composition of that wind-blown layer, scientists can estimate the rate of desertification, understanding not just that it happened, but how swiftly the landscape transformed. The human impact is etched into the very emptiness. These abandonment horizons offer a profound, ancient lesson in climate resilience, or the lack thereof. They show a civilization, however successful, ultimately vulnerable to a shift in the fundamental ecological contract. But this trace is not an end, it is a pivot. The silence in one place becomes the beginning of a new story somewhere else. The great dispersal from the heart of the Sahara set in motion a human migration that would seed cultures and influence the course of history along the continent's remaining arteries of life. The Great Dispersal was not an ending, but a scattering of seeds. The 19th trace of the Green Sahara is perhaps its most profound, a diaspora whose cultural legacy rippled outward to shape the course of history. As the savanna turned to dust, the people did not vanish into thin air. They followed the retreating monsoon rains southward and eastward, toward the last remaining refuges of water and life. One of the most significant corridors of this migration led directly to the Nile River Valley. Researchers now see compelling evidence that the influx of these pastoralists, with their sophisticated knowledge of cattle herding, social organization, and perhaps even early symbolic systems, provided a crucial catalyst for the complex societies that would later coalesce into dynastic Egypt. The fertile Nile floodplain offered a new kind of permanence, a place where the mobile pastoral lifestyle could settle and intensify, blending with local populations to lay the groundwork for pharaonic civilization. Another stream of this diaspora flowed south into the Sahel, the semi-arid belt just below the desert. Here, in a landscape that still echoed the conditions of their ancestral green homeland, these communities put down new roots. Over centuries, they developed into the sophisticated trading empires that would later dazzle the medieval world, like Ghana and Mali. Their mastery of trans-Saharan trade routes, their wealth in gold and cattle, and their complex social structures did not emerge from a vacuum. They were the cultural inheritance of a people who had once navigated an even vaster, greener world. The legacy is woven into the fabric of life itself. Linguistic studies suggest that words related to cattle and pastoralism in several African language families may have deep Saharan origins. Myths and oral traditions across the Sahel often speak of a time of great abundance or a migration from a distant, now lost homeland, possibly preserving a folk memory of the green world. The very concept of moving with herds, of a life rhythmically tied to the seasons and the search for pasture, is a direct thread connecting modern pastoralists to their Saharan ancestors. This trace transforms our understanding from loss to continuity. The story of the Green Sahara is not a dead end, but a branching point in the human story. Its people became ancestors, their innovations became foundations, and their memories became myths. Their civilization did not collapse and disappear. It migrated and transformed, seeding brilliance elsewhere. The echoes of their world are still with us in the languages spoken, the traditions practiced, and the empires that rose from their journey. To hear those echoes, however, we needed new eyes to see what the desert had hidden. The final chapter of this discovery is written not with a trowel, but with technology that can peer through time itself. The final chapter in this story is being written from orbit. The 20th and perhaps most transformative trace of the Green Sahara is not ancient at all. but a product of our own time, a technological revolution that allows us to see through the sand itself. Modern satellites, equipped with radar that penetrates the surface and multispectral sensors that detect subtle differences in vegetation and soil, are acting like X-ray vision for the entire desert. Combined with aerial photography and airborne LiDAR, which uses laser pulses to create ultra-precise topographic maps, these tools are fundamentally changing the game of Saharan archaeology. They allow researchers to identify features completely invisible to the human eye standing on the ground. A slight, linear depression in the bedrock, meaningless from a jeep, becomes a clear, buried river channel on a satellite image. A faint, circular pattern of discolored earth hints at the foundation stones of a settlement long since swallowed by dunes. These technologies have identified not just a few new sites, but thousands of potential targets, transforming the Sahara from an overwhelming, unknowable void into a landscape dense with clues. It has turned the greatest obstacle to exploration, the sheer, trackless scale of the desert, into an asset because from space you can survey an area the size of a country in a single sweep. Ambitious international efforts like the Trans-Sahara Project use these tools to systematically scan vast regions, methodically turning what was once labeled terra incognita on ancient maps into a meticulously charted archaeological frontier. This final trace represents our civilization's profound effort to reach back across time. It is our own form of memory, using the pinnacle of modern science, satellites that can sense the ghost of water and lasers that can measure the shadow of a wall, to answer the most enduring questions posed by the people who lived there. We are using light and data to reclaim a world lost to darkness and dust. With these 20 traces now laid out before us, from the ghost rivers to the orbital sensors, a complete picture finally comes into focus. It is a picture that changes everything we thought we knew about this empty quarter of our world. Each of these 20 traces is a single thread in a much larger tapestry. When you weave them together, a complete and startling picture emerges. The Green Sahara was not a quiet, empty garden. It was a dynamic and populous crossroads, a central stage in the early human story where innovation was a way of life. The monsoons did more than just water the land. They acted as a powerful engine for cultural development. Periods of abundance allowed societies to flourish and experiment, while the creeping pressure of gradual drying forced brilliant adaptations, from cattle herding to deep well engineering. This constant dialogue with a changing climate sparked creativity in every aspect of life. The rock art was not separate from the astronomy. The seasonal movements of herds informed the trade routes that carried exotic shells. The need to process wild grains led to tools that hinted at settled life. Every piece of evidence connects, revealing societies that were deeply observant, deeply connected to their world, and deeply connected to each other across vast distances. This synthesis completely overturns the old idea of the Sahara as an eternal, empty barrier. For thousands of years, it was the opposite, a vibrant heartland, a green bridge that linked the Mediterranean world to the heart of Africa. Its rivers were highways, its lakes were hubs, and its people were pioneers. Their story challenges us to see this desert not as a void on the map, but as a forgotten chapter in our collective history, a place where many paths of human culture once converged and flourished. Understanding this narrative does more than satisfy historical curiosity. It offers a profound lesson in resilience. These communities faced a climatic shift of monumental scale, not over decades but over centuries. Their response was not a single act, but a sustained symphony of adaptation, migration, and cultural memory. They transformed their way of life again and again, holding onto their identity even as they were forced to leave their homeland. This legacy of adaptability is their ultimate gift to us. In a world now facing rapid environmental change of our own making, the story of the Green Sahara reminds us that humanity's greatest strength has always been our capacity to observe, to innovate, and to find a new path forward, even when the old world is fading behind us. The desert holds their memory not as a tomb but as a testament. This empty expanse is a guardian holding its secrets close beneath the waves of sand. Our journey across the millennia reveals a Sahara transformed from a green cradle of civilization to a silent desert archive. The 20 traces we have explored, from the ghostly maps of paleo rivers to the genetic legacies in modern populations, collectively testify to something far greater than a lost paradise. They bear witness to the profound ingenuity and resilient spirit of the peoples who thrived there for thousands of years. Their story is not one of a forgotten dead end, but a vital chapter in the human saga, reminding us of the delicate balance within any environment and the enduring human capacity to adapt, to create beautiful and complex societies, and to migrate when the land itself changes. This narrative challenges the very idea of permanence. It shows that landscapes we assume are eternal are, in the grand scale of time, fleeting stages. The communities of the Green Sahara built their world upon a climate phase, and when that phase shifted, they faced a monumental, generations-long challenge. Their response, written in the archaeological record, was a masterpiece of flexibility, from altering their diets and tools to engineering new ways to find water, and ultimately embarking on great journeys to new homes. As we look at the empty dunes today, let us remember the vibrant world that once pulsed beneath them. Let that memory reframe this desert not as a barrier, but as a former bridge, a lost heartland whose legacy flows into the Nile, echoes in the Sahel, and lives on in the traditions of millions. The lesson it holds is timeless, a meditation on the deep connections between climate, culture, and human connection. It speaks to our own moment, reminding us that observation, innovation, and community are our most vital tools for navigating an uncertain future. If this exploration into deep history captivated you, please like this video and subscribe for more journeys into historical mysteries. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Which of these 20 traces did you find most fascinating? The satellite views of lost rivers, the intimate burials at Gobero, or the astronomical stones of Nabta Playa? Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep wondering.